200 200.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHAL.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. All right. When I went to sleep last night, the betting odds for the presidency were fairly close to where they were before the election. Fairly close. Not. Okay, so let me back up. When the election began, when counting began, betting odds were about 60% Biden, 40% Trump. And a friend of mine, who I won't name, asked me what I thought of the betting odds. And again, keep in mind, this is just at the beginning of the counting yesterday. And I said, I actually think the betting odds are about right at 60-40 for Biden. And he got real mad, and as the night went on and things were looking good for Trump, and for the record, we still don't know who the next president of the United States is. Right? It's drifting Biden's way, and we're going to talk about all of this in detail. But as things were looking very Trumpy for a little while, and in fact, at one point last night, betting odds got to over 80% for Trump to win, and he started texting at me, yelling at me, gosh, you're 60-40, Biden, 60-40 Biden betting odds thing was stupid. And I'm a numbers guy, and he's a numbers guy, and I haven't had this conversation with him yet, but remember that with 60-40, 40 times out of 100, which is almost half, the underdog, slight underdog, wins. Here's another way to think about it. If you ever have done any sports betting or even thought about any sports betting, when you've got an NFL game, you can bet on the point spread. I imagine most folks listening right now know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, here's how it works. If a team is favored to win a game, let's say a team is a 5-point favorite to win a game based on, their previous record during the season and where they're playing and whatever the bookies think the factors are. So a team is thought likely to win by 5 points. If you bet with the point spread, then if you take the team that's favored, your team has to win by more than 5 points in order for you to win the bet. If your team wins by 4 points or 3 points, even though they still won the game, you lose your bet. Now, here's where I'm going with this. If I told you that a team was a 3-point favorite in an NFL game, would you say that that is a massive favorite? Or would you say, well, that's a team that could easily lose. It's just a 3-point favorite. It's not like a 9 or 12 or 14-point favorite. Like a 3-point favorite is barely a favorite at all, right? So I want you to think about it that way, because a 3-point favorite in an NFL game is a 60-40 game. That's how close 60-40 is. It's really close. It's like saying one team has a 3-point edge over another team in an NFL game. So, when voting started last night, betting odds were 60-40 Biden. Then they went up, substantially for Trump, and then started drifting back down. And when I went to bed last night, a little after 11 o'clock, betting odds were 60-40 the other way, right? 60-40 for Trump at the time that I went to sleep. And again, you're still talking about a situation where that's a very tight race. I don't know, for some reason people hear 60-40 and think that that means somehow that's one side's a massive favorite. No. But here's what's happened over the course of the night and what continues to happen right now. The states that remain undecided, not called yet, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Some people want Arizona not to be called, but Arizona looks very, very likely to be Democrat. And as the voting has, as the counting has continued in these states, because the stuff that wasn't counted early, so much of it was in heavily Democratic areas. There was a point last night when the Fulton County election people, and that is basically Atlanta, said they were going to stop counting until today. Then they put out some other message that said, no, we're still counting, but it sure was slow. And then around Philadelphia, they said the same thing. One of those places, I forget which, said we had a water main break and we're going to have to stop for a while. Really? So earlier in the evening, with the votes that were counted, you saw President Trump ahead in places like Michigan and Wisconsin by a lot. 7 points, 9 points, 10 points. A lot. Georgia, Trump looked like he was up by maybe 5 or so. And Pennsylvania, Trump was up by something like 16, but Pennsylvania has been really, really, really slow. And what has happened in that time, again, they've been counting more Democratic votes. Now, I'm not going to jump to saying this is fraud or theft of the election or anything like that, and I am going to share some sound with you from President Trump a little bit later this hour. Him talking about what he wants to do and what he wants to see. And it's some pretty aggressive stuff. I'm not jumping at this point to fraud. There isn't evidence of fraud yet. But the longer the counting takes, two things. The longer the counting takes, the more possible fraud becomes. But even more importantly, the longer counting takes, the more the side that loses, especially if it's the Trump side, losing exactly the way I said on the show this could happen and was fairly likely to happen, the more they won't trust the outcome of the election and will be very angry. I'm not saying anyone's going to be violent. Violence is what the left does, but will be very angry. For 2 years, for 4 years. And remember, Pennsylvania has said since well before the election that they were going to be slow to count, and their state law does not allow them to start counting, did not allow them to start counting until today, where other states like Colorado could start processing ballots. They couldn't start adding up vote totals, but they could start processing ballots earlier. So we got a lot of our vote in, and we pretty much know not every race is definitely done. There are a couple of races like maybe 1 or 2 attorney general races and so on, and maybe 1 or 2 state legislature races, but there isn't going to be a change in control in our state legislature, so it really doesn't matter. We got our numbers pretty early, but Pennsylvania, they still only have, at least according to the New York Times, 75% counted. The next lowest state is Arizona with 82%. But that appears less consequential because it appears that Arizona is going for the Democrat. Fox called that really early last night, and the Trump campaign was very angry, saying there are still too many votes to be counted, and you don't know that this has gone to the Democrat, and you shouldn't call it. But as you look at these states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and I am looking at the New York Times right now. I don't know for certain that this is the most up-to-date information, but Pennsylvania shows 75% counted, and Trump is up by 11.5 points. Decent chance he wins that. Okay? Now, let's leave Pennsylvania in the Trump category for now. For now. That means that he has to hold Georgia, which is slowly slipping away, but I think there's still a decent chance that Trump keeps Georgia. The New York Times shows Trump up by 2.2% with 8% left to go. So that would mean that in order for Biden to win, if these numbers are right, Biden would need to get about 75% of the vote in Georgia that has not been counted yet. About 75%. That's a huge number, but where the votes remain to be counted in Georgia, Biden could get 75%. Right? Imagine if we were in a situation in Colorado where the Republican was leading, but Denver remained to be counted. It's that kind of situation. So we'll see. And then Michigan and Wisconsin. Last night around maybe 8 or 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, Trump appeared to have 7, 8, 9-point lead maybe in Michigan. And as it stands right now, Trump's lead appears to be 0.5 point based on what I'm looking at. 0.5 point. Because, again, some of these urban areas, very Democratic areas, are the ones that hadn't been counted yet. Similar in Wisconsin. Trump was well ahead in Wisconsin with a lot of the early voting. But now, and again, according to the New York Times, with 97% of the vote counted, Biden is ahead by 0.75%. So what does this mean we need to see for President Trump to have a chance to win? He needs to keep Georgia, which is probably a little better than 50-50. In fact, we can see betting odds on individual states right now. Georgia is showing 57% Democrat. If that's right, Trump is in huge trouble. Georgia's showing 57% Democrat. Pennsylvania is showing 62% Democrat. I'm skeptical of both of those. I think Trump can win both of them. But here's what we've been talking about on this show for days, as I told you what my map looked like. Now, my map had him winning Georgia and Pennsylvania. And then I said he would need to win one of Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minnesota, and none of those would be easy. And I thought that his best chance was probably Arizona, but he didn't win Arizona. And now the other 3 states appear to be drifting away from him. And at this point, as I put together my own map, this is so crazy. Listen to this. This is unbelievable. And folks, you might wonder why President Trump went to Nebraska a couple days ago. Why it's so important. All right. And I promise we're going to talk about all the Colorado stuff coming up in the next segment. As I look at my map, if Trump holds Georgia and if Trump wins Pennsylvania, but if Biden wins Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, then because it looks like Biden got one electoral vote in Nebraska, Biden would win this race 270 to 268, which would obviously make it equal to it would make it the closest election in modern American history, the closest election since our elections worked the way they do now. You need 270 to win. 269 is a tie that goes to the House of Representatives, and if it were 269, President Trump would probably win the election, because in the House of Representatives, if it goes there, it is not that each member of the House gets a vote, like on a piece of legislation. It's that each state gets a vote, and there are more Republican states than Democratic states. And I mentioned this on the show, and I think a lot of people didn't understand the potential significance. President Trump went to Nebraska. You never hear about a presidential candidate going to Nebraska. President Trump went to Nebraska because his people saw that this map could happen and that this election could come down to a single electoral vote. Now, there are still plenty of votes to be counted. It might not happen this way. But if you had to pick a quite likely map right now, it would be this. In a way, I have to say, if Joe Biden is going to be president, I would probably prefer that he win by slightly more than 2 electoral votes just to stop the chaos. Here's the good news, though, the really good news, and we're going to talk about this more in the next segment of the show. Busting through every professional prediction, it does appear that Republicans will keep control of the United States Senate. We'll talk about that and Colorado right after this.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630.